Chapter 11: The Spanish and Portuguese Empires, the First Global Administrators and Their Decay. The Iberian Empires, Spain and Portugal, were the first truly global imperial systems. They connected continents, oceans, economies, and peoples in ways no previous civilization had achieved. Their ships crossed the Atlantic, circled the Cape of Good Hope, penetrated South America, traversed the Indian Ocean, and mapped vast stretches of the world previously unknown to Europeans. Their administrations governed territories spanning the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. They pioneered global trade networks linking silver mines in Bolivia to markets in China, sugar plantations in Brazil to refineries in Europe, and spice islands in Southeast Asia to distribution hubs in Lisbon and Seville. They constructed an early prototype of globalization: complex supply chains, multinational governance, currency flows, information networks, and maritime logistics. But they also provide a powerful early modern demonstration of the capability, complexity trap, how the very innovations that enabled rapid expansion produced systems too intricate for the available human capital to sustain. Spain and Portugal built administrative machines that required high levels of coordination, literacy, numeracy, and discipline, but their population base, education systems, and institutional structures were not deep enough to scale that capability across the vast theaters they conquered. The result was predictable: early brilliance, followed by bureaucratic strain, then dilution of standards, and finally long-term stagnation masked by enormous colonial wealth. The story begins with Portugal, the pioneer of the Atlantic and Indian Ocean worlds. By the early 15th century, the Portuguese crown had developed a maritime culture supported by navigators, cartographers, shipbuilders, and astronomers operating out of Lagos and Sagres. This small kingdom accumulated capability in a narrow but critical domain: deep water navigation. With this advantage, Portugal bypassed overland Islamic trade routes and reached West Africa, then India, then Southeast Asia. This expansion required not only maritime skill but administrative innovation. To manage this new global network, Portugal created the Casa de India in Lisbon, one of the first true global logistics ministries in history. It oversaw shipping schedules, customs duties, spice imports, colonial appointments, and trade monopolies. For a time, this worked. It proved that Portugal did recognize the need for bureaucratic coordination at scale. But as trade volumes exploded, the institutions saturated. Offices were sold. Bribes became routine. Smuggling flourished. The system became too complex for the capability available to operate it. Corruption did not appear because Portuguese officials were uniquely immoral. It appeared because administrative demand exceeded administrative competence. For a small country with a limited population, this was an extraordinary achievement, but also a fatal constraint. Portugal never expanded its capability pool at the same rate as its empire. As it acquired territories in Brazil, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, the complexity of administration exploded. Each territory required governors, judges, tax collectors, soldiers, priests, engineers, and translators. Lisbon simply could not produce enough skilled people. Standards were lowered. Offices became hereditary or purchasable. Capability fell. Corruption filled the gap. Spain followed a similar arc on a larger scale. After the unification of Castile and Aragon, and the completion of the Reconquista in 1492, Spain inherited a martial, centralized state capable of projecting power across the Atlantic. The conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires was executed by a small cadre of highly capable individuals: soldiers, translators, administrators, priests, operating with exceptional skill. Like the Mongols, Spain expanded through concentrated elite capability. But Spain also inherited two densely populated, highly complex civilizations. To govern them, the Crown constructed sophisticated institutions: the Council of the Indies, the Casa de Contratación in Seville, and layered viceroyalties staffed by educated officials. For several generations, Spain produced enough capable administrators to govern effectively. Colonial wealth funded universities, schools, and bureaucratic expansion. Then came the pivot. The discovery of silver at Potosi in 1545 unleashed one of the largest resource windfalls in history. Spain suddenly controlled the majority of the world's silver supply. Instead of investing this wealth into institutional capability, the empire used it to fund wars, sustain aristocratic lifestyles, and import manufactured goods. The result was the Spanish price revolution, mass inflation that hollowed out domestic industry. The nobility increasingly lived on rents rather than productive labor. Innovation slowed. Education stagnated. Financial literacy declined. This is the structural moment where extraction replaced competence. External wealth substituted for internal capability. Institutions weakened because capability was no longer necessary for survival. In the Americas, Spain attempted to preserve standards by sending peninsular-born officials to govern. But this blocked capable local Creoles from advancement. Instead of cultivating colonial capability, the system suppressed it. Spain could not decentralize because it had failed to build depth. It could not maintain centralization because its own capability base was shrinking. The contradiction ensured instability. By the 17th century, the consequences became visible. Portugal began losing its Asian trade routes, not to superior armies, but to superior institutions. The Dutch, through the VOC, built disciplined naval logistics, professional merchant fleets, and joint stock financing systems. They seized Malacca, Ceylon, and the Spice Islands. Portugal did not lose because it lacked ships. It lost because it lacked the institutional capability to defend a global network. A higher capability system replaced a stagnant one. Spain, exhausted by endless wars and fiscal crises, leaned even harder on colonial revenue to fund a bloated bureaucracy at home. Both empires attempted reform. Portugal under the Marquis of Pombal, Spain under the Bourbon reforms. But these reforms were implemented by weakened institutions with low capability density. You cannot reform a system if the people implementing reform lack competence. The Bourbon reforms improved efficiency but antagonized colonial elites, accelerating independence movements. Pombal modernized sectors of Portugal but could not manufacture the human capital required to sustain empire. The collapse of Spanish rule in the Americas was not primarily caused by ideology or revolution. It was caused by administrative exhaustion. Spain could no longer staff, finance, or coordinate a planetary empire. When Napoleon invaded Iberia, the weakened system fractured instantly. External stress revealed internal failure. Portugal followed a similar path. Brazil's independence occurred through dynastic separation rather than war because Lisbon lacked the capacity to enforce control. In Africa and Asia, Portuguese rule persisted largely through inertia. By the 20th century, Portugal was one of Europe's poorest states, utterly incapable of sustaining empire. When decolonization pressures rose after World War II, the system collapsed rapidly. What unites both trajectories is the same pattern seen throughout this book. Early brilliance driven by concentrated capability. Rapid expansion generating system complexity. Demographic and educational stagnation. Lowered standards to maintain appearances. Corruption filling operational gaps. Collapse under external stress. These empires were pioneers. But their innovation outran their human capital. The machine they built required more capability than they could produce. Rather than simplify or reform, they diluted standards, weakening military, administrative, and economic foundations. The Iberian empires were humanity's first planetary stress test of the capability-complexity paradox. Their story foreshadows what would later happen to Britain, France, Russia, the Ottomans, and eventually every modern state facing the same fundamental equation. The next chapter turns to the British Empire, the most complex imperial system ever constructed, and examines how even the most institutionally sophisticated empire eventually succumbed to the same structural limits.